Hello students, in this chapter at a glance video, we will try to revise the complete chapter Plant Kingdom with respect to NEET examination. So, now coming to the chapter history of Plant Kingdom in the previous years of NEET, the average number of questions that are appearing in the NEET examination are 2 to 3. And here we have given you the data from 2020 to 2025, how many questions have appeared in each year with respect to this chapter. Then these are the PYQ questions from the respective years. This is 2025. So in Bryophytes, the gem may help in which of the following? So gem are multicellular asexual buds, so they help in asexual reproduction. Then this is supposed to be a match the following question. You have to match Pteridophyte, Bryophyte, Angiosperm and Gymnosperm with the respective things. So you can just observe here a Pteridophyte, Salvinia, a Bryophyte which is supposed to be typically nothing but polytrichum, and an Angiosperm, Salvia, whereas a Gymnosperm, Ginkgo. So this is supposed to be, the correct option comes to be the fourth one, which is supposed to be now. Then, which of the following characteristics feature of Gymnosperm? Now, seeds are absent. Now, this is not a characteristic feature. Gymnosperms have flowers for reproduction. No, Gymnosperms do not have flowers. Seeds are enclosed in fruits. No, fruits are actually, ovaries absent in Gymnosperms. So, they can't be nature with respect to fruits are absent. Then seeds are naked. As ovaries absent, seeds are naked. So, the characteristic feature of Gymnosperms is the fourth one. Seeds are naked. Now, the correct sequence of events in the life cycle of Bryophytes is. So, these are the list of events given in the life cycle of Bryophytes, and you have to arrange them in the correct order. That is the question. So, how to arrange them in the correct order is, now the dominant stage in the life cycle of a Bryophyte is the gametophyte. So, the attachment, you have to start with the attachment of gametophyte to the substratum. The gametophyte will bear the sex organs. So, you will be noticing the release of what in the sense? Nothing but the typical anthrozoids. Then, after the release of the anthrozoids, you will observe the process of fertilization, which comes to be fusion of anthrozoid with egg. Then, you would be noticing that the formation of zygote will be followed by embryo, and embryo develops into sporophyte. So, formation of sporophyte. And from the sporophyte, which has the Fuchsita and capsule in most cases, you will observe the spore mother cells in the capsule which undergo reduction division to form spores. So, if you arrange these A to E options correctly, then you will be able to get the first one as the answer. Now, this is another question from 2025. Given below are the stages in the life cycle of Pteridophytes. Arrange the following stages in the correct sequence. So, these are certain stages: prothallus, meiosis in the spore mother cells, fertilization, etc. from A to E. So, how could you arrange them? So, here, now when you are supposed to be observing, you can go for the dominant stage in the life cycle of a Pteridophyte is sporophyte. So, we will search and we will see which option could be matching. So, now you can go for the typical aspect of meiosis in the spore mother cells. You can start here. Now, meiosis in the spore mother cells. Now, after meiosis in the spore mother cells, because you have the meiosis completed, you will get a haploid structure called spore. The spore develops into prothallus. So, you will be going to prothallus. Now, the prothallus will bear the sex organs, which is supposed to be antheridia and archegonia. Prothallus represents the gametophytic stage. Now, then you will be observing that the antheridia and archegonia, which are the sex organs, the antheridia releases the anthrozoids, which will reach the female sex organ archegonia, and fusion occurs with respect to the fertilization process. then that's the fertilization. So these are the events which you can summarize in a correct sequence to get the correct answer. Now, this is supposed to be, read the following statements and choose the set of correct statements in the members of Phaeophyceae, brown algae. Asexual reproduction occurs usually by biflagellate zoospores. Sexual reproduction is by oogamous method only. Stored food is in the form of carbohydrate, which is either mannitol or laminarin. The major pigments found are chlorophyll A, C, and carotenoids and xanthophylls. Vegetative cells have a cellulosic wall, usually covered on the outer side by gelatinous coating of algae. Now, which is the correct one? So, here when you look at all these statements, the sexual reproduction, if you just observe, the fusion types are 3 types. You could observe from the simplest method, iso to oogamous, all 3 varieties, but it is given as only oogamous. So, except that statement, all look to be correct. That's one. Now, this is from 2023. Identify the pair of heterosporous pteridophytes among the following. They are asking heterosporous pteridophytes. So, what are the heterosporous pteridophytes? Xylotum salvinia, Equisetum salvinia, Lycopodium selaginella, and salvinia. So, here the answer is selaginella and salvinia. Now, this is also an assertion reason question. You can just observe. The assertion is the first stage of gametophyte in the life cycle of a moss is protonema stage. And what's the reason? Protonema develops directly from spores produced in the capsule. So, what do you choose as an option for this? So, exactly the first stage is nothing but the filamentous stage called juvenile stage, which is the protonema, and it develops from the spore germination. So, here we have to choose an option. A and R are correct, and R correctly explains A. Now, this is the second one with regard to the same 23 paper. This is also an assertion reason. In Gymnosperms, the pollen grains are released from the microsporangium and carried by air currents. Because they have a direct pollination, they will land on the micropyle of the ovule, where the agent is now considered to be the air. Now, the reason is air currents carry the pollen grains to the mouth of the archegonia, where the male gametes are discharged and the pollen tube is not formed. So, here there is supposed to be a point which you need to understand. Pollen tube is not formed, which is not correct. Pollen tube is formed. So, therefore, here you have to choose A is true and R is false. So, now students, let us go through certain important lines of NCERT with respect to plant kingdom chapter. So, we follow Whittaker's 5 kingdom system of classification. So, cyanobacteria, so-called blue-green algae, are no more algae. They are not a part of the plant kingdom. The other point is systems of classification. There are 3 types of systems of classification, where the first one is artificial system of classification, which is supposed to be describing majority of the organisms, considering only gross superficial morphological characters such as habit, color, number, shape of leaves, etc. So, they are mainly based on the vegetative characters, and of course, the lineage system of classification, which is supposed to be called as the sexual system, taking into consideration of characters of andrecium, is an example for the artificial system. And artificial systems give equal weightage to vegetative and sexual characters. This is supposed to be a point that is very important. So, vegetative characters are not stable when compared to the sexual characters. So, we should not consider them giving equal weightage with sexual characters. So, vegetative characters are easily affected by environment. So, we should be giving more priority or importance to the sexual characters which are not easily affected by environment. The second type of system of classification is the natural systems, which considers both external features as well as the internal features. Even it takes into account the knowledge of different branches like anatomy, embryology, phytochemistry, etc. George Bentham and J.D. Hooker's system is an example for the natural system of classification. But these systems also have a drawback. The drawback that's supposed to be observed in these systems is they don't account for the evolutionary trends that are observed in plants, which is a very important point, which is corrected in the next systems that is called as the phylogenetic systems of classification. So if you see the phylogenetic systems of classification, as I told you, these systems consider all the points that are considered in the previous systems, which are the artificial as well as the natural system of classifications on par. They also consider the evolutionary relationships between the various organisms, which are highly acceptable and also important in understanding the relationship between various groups of plants. Now, pertaining to the other aspects which are given here, we have three important points. One is numerical taxonomy. This is such a taxonomy which is supposed to be done considering a large number of characters, and every character is given equal importance, where each character is given a code number. Even the knowledge of computers is taken into account. That is numerical taxonomy. And cytotaxonomy is more based on the typical characters that are observed in a cell, like the chromosome number, structure, behavior. This is supposed to be called as the cytological information is taken while dealing with cytotaxonomy. And chemotaxonomy is the third one, which is based on the chemical constraints of the cell with respect to their composition. So this is on the aspect of cytotaxonomy, numerical taxonomy, and also chemotaxonomy. Now, coming to the first group in plant kingdom, algae. You can find algae which are mostly aquatic organisms, and you can observe their variation in their sizes. They range from a colonial alga like volvox to filamentous forms like Ulothrix and Spirogyra. A few forms like kelps, they form the massive plant bodies. Now, the other one is regarding their reproductive methods. So, algae reproduce by three different methods: vegetative, asexual, and sexual. Vegetative reproduction is by fragmentation, and asexual reproduction is most commonly by formation of zoospores. And if you consider the sexual reproduction, the gametes which are supposed to be undergoing fusion, the two gametes may be similar, non-flagellated as observed in Spirogyra. They may be flagellated as undergoing isogamy in the case of Ulothrix. The fusion of two gametes of dissimilar sizes in the species of typically Eudorina, which is anisogamous. The gametes are anisogamous and the fusion is called anisogamy. And the last one is oogamy, where the gametes are oogamous, which is observed in volvox and fucus. Then, now you could see these are the diagrams with respect to different types of algae. The green algae, the first two, which is nothing but volvox. The second one is Ulothrix. The second in the row, you could see the brown algae, which have holdfast, stipe, and frond, where you can also see the fucus, the second one, which is supposed to be having an air bladder and a midrib with respect to the frond, leaf-like structure, and the first one laminaria, and the next group, the last group is red algae. You could see Porphyra and Polysiphonia. So diagrammatically, these are very important with respect to the questions that appear in the question papers. Now, the other one is the economic importance of algae, which we need to concentrate in terms of question and answers. So, algae are important in very different ways. The first is at least half of the total carbon dioxide fixation is carried out by algae, and Whenever they are doing carbon dioxide fixation, they try to do oxygenic photosynthesis, so they increase the dissolved oxygen content in the nearby environment where they carry out. Then coming to the consumption of algae, more than many species of algae, nearly 70 species of marine algae are used as food. Certain are like laminaria, sargassum, and even the algal cell walls, they have water holding substances which are called hydrocolloids or phycocolloids. There you could see in brown algae you have algin, and also in red algae you have carrageen, and the other one is in red algae we have agar, which is commercially used for different purposes. You can take it with respect to the preparation of ice creams, and also you can use it as a medium in the case of agarose gel electrophoresis. This agar is just obtained from red algae, Gracilaria and Gileadia. The other one is the green alga, chlorella. This is supposed to be a unicellular alga, which is a good source of proteins, and it is used as a food supplement even for space travelers. So algae, when we go for the classification of algae, based on the reserve food material and type of pigments that are present in them, they are supposed to be divided into three different groups, that is green algae, brown algae, red algae, Chlorophyceae, Phaeophyceae and Rhodophyceae. Now let us see certain important points with regard to the Chlorophyceae members. As I told you, they are commonly called green algae or grass green algae due to their dominance in the pigments A and B. And the chloroplasts which are observed in them are of different shapes. They can be plate-like, they can be reticulate, they can be cup-shaped, they can be spiral, they can be ribbon-shaped. Ribbon-shaped is observed in Spirogyra. Now, the chloroplasts also have storage bodies which are called pyrenoids. So, pyrenoids contain protein besides starch. So, pyrenoids store starch, and they also contain what in the sense protein. And coming to the cell wall, which is supposed to be seen in the green algal members, it is a two-layered cell wall where the inner layer is made up of cellulose and the outer layer is made up of pectin, pectose. Now coming to the vegetative reproduction, it usually takes place by fragmentation, and flagellated zoospores are involved in asexual reproduction. But sexual reproduction in green algae occurs by all three methods, that is isogamous, anisogamous and oogamous. So certain examples of green alga are Chlamydomonas, Volvox, Eulothrix, Spirogyra and Chara. Now if you go to brown algae, so brown algae are primarily found in marine habitats, and their size also varies, and you could see certain filamentous forms like ectocarpus, and you could also see profusely branched forms like kelps. And coming to the pigments that are observed in them, you could see chlorophyll A, chlorophyll C, carotenoids, and a type of xanthophyll pigment which is supposed to be called fucoxanthin, which is important in giving the brown color. But the intensity of the color will range from olive green to various shades of brown, depending upon the amount of the fucoxanthin that is observed in them. Now, when you observe the importance of these brown algae, the complex form of food which you observe here is nothing but a complex carbohydrate called laminarin or mannitol. And coming to the cell wall layers, you could see that the vegetative cells have a cellulosic cell wall and usually covered on the outer side by a gelatinous coating of algae. And the plant body is attached to the substratum by a holdfast, and you will have a stalk and the stipe and a leaf-like photosynthetic organ called frond. So the plant body in brown algae has three parts. One is the holdfast and the stalk called as the stipe, and the typical leaf-like photosynthetic part which is called as the frond. Now coming to the reproduction part, as I told you, vegetative reproduction occurs by fragmentation, but asexual reproduction in brown algae occurs by biflagellated pear-shaped zoospores where the flagella are unequal and they are laterally attached. So there are three characters here. The shape is pear-shaped, number of flagella are 2 and they are unequal and they are laterally attached. That is the sexual reproduction with regard to spores. And coming to sexual reproduction, here also all three types of sexual reproduction are seen: isogamous, anisogamous, oogamous type with respect to the nature of the gametes and the fusion. And the fusion of gametes, the union of gametes takes place in water or in the female sex organ, oogonium. And you could observe that here the gametes are also having the same shape as the asexual spores, which is pyriform or pear-shaped. And the examples like Ectocarpus, Dictyota, Laminaria, Sargassum and Fucus. Now, Rhodophyceae. The members of Rhodophyceae, they are commonly called red algae. You could see a red pigment in them that's called R-phycoerythrin. Apart from A and D, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll D are present. Apart from that, they have a red pigment called phycoerythrin in their body. And the stored food is Floridian starch, whose structure is very similar to amylopectin or glycogen. Glycogen, you know, it's a polysaccharide, and amylopectin is also the same. So the structure of this Floridian starch is similar to this. That is very important. And in red algae, once again, the same point, the vegetative reproduction is by fragmentation, but the reproduction with regard to asexual mode is by non-motile spores. It's not by motile spores, because in the previous two classes of green algae and brown algae, we have observed motile spores. But here it is by non-motile spores, which you could see. So the same points here, which are just shown. Now coming to the red algae with regard to the cell wall, you can see the composition is cellulose, pectin and polysulfate esters. That is also very important. Now here comes the differential point comparing to the first two classes. You could see the sexual reproduction is oogamous, and you could only observe that the oogamous reproduction is followed by complex post-fertilization changes. Now the common examples are Polysiphonia, Porphyra, Gracilaria and Giladium. Now the second group, which is supposed to be Bryophytes. So Bryophytes are commonly called as the first land plants, and they are also called amphibians of the plant kingdoms. So these diagrams, you could just go through them. The first two, they indicate the Marchantia, a liverwort. Now this indicates the leafy stage of the Funaria, which is the gametophore leafy stage, adult stage, and this is supposed to be a sphagnum peat moss. And you could see here the antheridial branch is above the archegonial branch. And you could see here the sporophyte and gametophyte are shown clearly in the diagram of Funaria, which is supposed to be showing the gametophyte is the lower stage where all structures are haploid, and the sporophyte is supposed to be the diploid stage. So these are some of the points with regard to the bryophytes now. Bryophytes are also called amphibians of plant kingdom. The why bryophytes are called amphibians of plant kingdom? Because bryophytes depend on water for sexual reproduction. So the fusion, in the case of bryophytes, the fusion of gametes requires water. So they are called amphibians of plant kingdom. And the plant body of bryophytes is somewhat differentiated than algae. And here there is some development in the organization of the plant body. So you could see that unlike that of the thallus, you have here a prostate or erect. They are supposed to be certain things like there is a attachment to the substratum by rhizoids, which may be unicellular or multicellular. And you also have a root-like rhizoid leaf-like phylloids and a stem-like structure called colloid. That's one. And you could also observe that the main plant body, which is the gamete producing plant body, is called as the gametophyte, and the gametophyte will bear the male sex organ antheridia and the female sex organ archegonia. The antheridium will release the biflagellated antherozoites, and the archegonium, which is the flask-shaped structure, will have a single egg in it. The antherozoites are moving in water and they reach the archegonium, and within the archegonium they fuse, and that fusion results in the formation of zygote. So zygote will undergo actually zygote doesn't undergo reduction division. That's the difference point you have to understand. Embryo for the first time develops in bryophytes. Zygote do not undergo reduction division and they immediately produce a multicellular body called as sporophyte. Now, the sporophyte is not a free living structure, but it is photosynthetic attached to the gametophyte. The sporophyte will have spore mother cells which undergo meiosis to produce spores. The spores will germinate and give rise to gametophyte. That's very, very important. Now, coming to the economic importance of these bryophytes. Bryophytes, there are two statements that are very important in this paragraph. Bryophytes have a little economic importance, but they have a great ecological importance. These are two contrasting things. So, ecological importance of bryophytes is supposed to be mostly with regard to, because mosses along with lichens are the first organisms to colonize rocks. So, in ecological succession, along with lichens, these are the organisms that are the first to colonize a bare rock. That means the mosses along with lichens. Then the second one is mosses go in the form of dense mats on the surface of the soil, and they reduce the impact of falling rain and prevent soil erosion. So this is supposed to be on the positive side, ecologically important aspects. And also commercially, the other one is sphagnum, which is supposed to be called as the peat moss, is supposed to be providing peat that has been long used as a fuel, and sphagnum is also used as a material to transport perishable items because it has the water holding capacity. So these are the major aspects with regard to the economical angle of the bryophytes and also ecological part. Now, in our book, the bryophytes are classified into two particular groups. One is liverworts and mosses. So the name liverworts, Hepaticopsida, is more with regard to the shape of the thallus that you observe. You could just notice that the liverwort is a thalloid. Example is Markantia. And the thallus is dorsiventrally differentiated. And in asexual reproduction of liverworts, that is because of the specialized multicellular asexual buds called gemmae. So these gemmae, they develop in special small receptacle structures which are called gemma cups. And during sexual reproduction, the male and female sex organs which you just observe, they may be produced on the same or different thalli. They may be produced on the same thallus or on different thallus. If you take the Markantia, they are produced on different thalli. And when the fertilization is completed, on the female thallus, after the fertilization is over, you would observe the development of the sporophyte, which is divisible into foot, seta and capsule. And you would observe that the capsule will have the spore mother cells, which after meiosis will be producing spores. The spores germinate into gametophytes. So these are the points regarding the liverworts. Then the second group of typical plants in bryophytes is mosses. So in the life cycle of a moss plant, there are two stages. One is the juvenile stage, the other one is the adult stage. The juvenile stage is supposed to be a filamentous form and it develops from the direct germination of a spore, which is called as the protonema. And the adult stage is a leafy stage which has root-like rhizoids, stem-like colloid and leaf-like phylloids. So these are the two stages that are explained here. The first stage is the juvenile stage protonema and the second stage is the leafy stage. On the leafy stage, you could observe leaf-like structures are spirally arranged. That's also a point which you need to remember. And here, coming to the vegetative reproduction, it's by fragmentation or budding of secondary protonema, and you could also see that the development of sex organs occurs on the leafy stage. And after fertilization, the zygote develops into sporophyte consisting of foot, seta and capsule. The sporophyte in mosses is more elaborate than liverworts. So when you compare the organization and developmental nature of the sporophyte of liverworts and mosses, which is well developed in the sense it is nothing but the sporophyte of mosses is more elaborate than liverworts. And the spores are formed after meiosis, and mosses also have an elaborate spore dispersal mechanism, which is very, very important. Now, the examples of these moss plants, one is a funaria, the second one is polytrichum, the third one is spag. So, these are the three examples. Now, the next plant group, which is called pteridophytes. So, pteridophytes, they are first true land plants. When compared to the bryophytes, their plant body is well developed, and pteridophytes include horsetails, ferns and even club mosses. And these are the first terrestrial plants to possess vascular tissues. So, these are the first group of plants to develop vascular tissues, namely xylem and phloem. That is very, very important. And pteridophytes generally they flourish well in sandy soil conditions. Coming to the plant body, because they are well differentiated, they have root, stem and leaves. The leaves in pteridophytes may be small, microphyllous as in the case of Selaginella, or large macrophyllous as in the case of ferns. Now the leaves will also be bearing the spore producing structures called sporangiums, then they are called sporophylls. And these spore producing leaves, they are called sporophylls. They are aggregated to form a cone or strobili, which are so distinctly seen in the case of two examples with regard to pteridophytes, Selaginella and Equisetum. So they show strobili or cones. And the sporangia produce spores by meiosis in spore mother cells. The spore mother cells undergo meiosis, and the spores will germinate to give rise to, these are very important points, inconspicuous, small but multicellular, we'll come back to these diagrams, multicellular, free-living, photosynthetic, thalloid gametophytes, which is called prothallus. So the spore upon germination gives rise to multicellular, mostly photosynthetic, free-living thalloid gametophyte called as prothallus. So this is the only plant group where the dominant stage is sporophyte, which is free-living, as well as the other stage, which is the prothallus, which represents the gametophyte, which is supposed to be multicellular, mostly photosynthetic, as well as it is also free-living. Now, let us just complete this and then go to the diagrams. Now, the distribution of pteridophytes is restricted to only certain parts of the globe. The reason for this is just nothing but the gametophytes do require cool, damp, shady places, but they don't try to prevail everywhere. So, wherever the gametophyte is able to survive, there you could observe more typical presence of these pteridophytes, because the gametophyte requires certain conditions for its survival. Now, you could also observe that the sex organs, which are Antheridia and Archegonia, you could notice that the antherozoites are released, they travel in water and reach the mouth of the archegonium, and after fusion in the archegonium of male gamete with female gamete, what is formed in the sense zygote. So zygote produces a multicellular, well differentiated sporophyte, which I told you, which is the dominant phase. So here Unlike bryophytes, where all bryophytes are homosporous, majority of the pteridophytes are homosporous, whereas certain majority of the pteridophytes are homosporous, but certain pteridophytes, they are heterosporous. Heterosporous means they produce two kinds of spores. Macro is large, micro is small. The examples are Selaginella and Salvinia. So these two pteridophytes, they are heterosporous, but majority of them are homosporous. Now, the megaspores and microspores, which are supposed to be germinating to give rise to female and male gametophytes respectively. So the megaspores will give rise to female, whereas the microspore gives rise to the male gametophytes. And the heterosporous pteridophytes are the group of plants which show precursors for seed habit. So the precursor for seed habit is seen in the heterosporous pteridophytes, namely Selaginella and Salvinia. The reason is the development of zygote into young embryos takes place within the female gametophytes. This event is a precursor for seed habit, considered as an important step in evolution. So, heterosporous pteridophytes show precursors for seed habit, but pteridophytes do not show seeds. They show precursor for seed habit, that too heterosporous pteridophytes only. Now, these are the four classes of pteridophytes: Psilopsida, which is represented by Psilotum; Lycopsida, represented by Selaginella and Lycopodium; Sphenopsida, Equisetum; Pteropsida, Dryopteris, Pteris, and Edianta. Now, let us see what I told you, these diagrams. Now, you could see here, the first one is Selaginella. The second one is Equisetum, which is having rhizome as the stem modification. You could see the branches are arranged in whorls, and you could also see the strobilus, which is supposed to be shown. And the other one is supposed to be the next two. This is supposed to be a fern, Pteris. Then the last one is Salvinia, which is a hydrophyte, an aquatic pteridophyte. Now, we will just go to the next group, which is nothing but the Gymnosperms. So, you could observe here, Gymnosperms, they are supposed to be the first group in phanerogams. So, Gymnosperms, gymno means naked, sperma means seeds. So, these are plants with naked seeds. So, Gymnosperms will include medium-sized trees or tall trees and shrubs. So, you could see Sequoia, which is one of the tallest tree species, and here you could observe completely developed plant body where the dominant stage is sporophyte, and you could notice taproots, and these taproots in two different plants, namely Pinus and Cycas, also show modifications. That is, in the case of Pinus, you observe fungal hyphae to get associated with the roots, therefore they are called mycorrhizal roots. While in the case of Cycas, specialized roots develop which grow in a negatively zeotropic manner, and they have the nitrogen fixing cyanobacteria, nostoc and anabena in them. Those roots are called nothing but the corloid roots. So, corloid roots are seen in Cycas, mycorrhizal roots are seen in Pinus. Coming to the stem part, the stem may be branched or unbranched. Unbranched stems could be observed in Cycas. Branched stems are observed in Pinus and Sideros. So, in the case of leaves, you could observe that Cycas is supposed to be showing pinnate leaves that will be persisting for few years. And in conifers, which is another group, you could notice that the leaves are needle-like and they have thick cuticle and sunken stomata. These are adaptations to reduce water loss that occurs by transpiration. Now, the other points in the case of Gymnosperms are these. All Gymnosperms are heterosporous. This is a contrasting statement when compared to the previous group called as Pteridophytes, where we discussed that in Pteridophytes, you observe majority of them are homosporous, some are heterosporous, which are specific examples. Now here all are heterosporous because they produce microspores and megaspores. The two kinds of spores are produced within the sporangia and they are borne on sporophylls which are arranged spirally along an axis to form lacs or compact strobili or cones. Compact strobili or cone is nothing but the sporophylls are aggregated to form a bunch, which is represented here as the strobili or cone. But lax is loosely arranged sporophylls. That is very important, which you observe in the female plant of Cycas. Now, at the same time, you could observe that if you take the two examples, one is supposed to be the pinus plant, the male cone and female cone, the male and female strobili may be present on the same tree as in pinus. In contrast, in Cycas, the male cone is seen on the male plant, but the female cone is not there. They were on the female plant, the megasporophylls are arranged loosely. So Pinus has both male and female cone, but Cycas has only male cone. But in the female plant of Cycas, you observe microsporophylls loosely arranged, so-called lacs. And the male gametophytic generation is highly reduced in any gymnosperm, and it is represented by a limited number of cells that could be highly reduced and called pollen grain. That is very, very important. And the other one is, you could notice that the megaspores enclosed within the megasporangium develops into a multicellular female gametophyte that bears two or more archegonia. So, megasporangium, this is nothing but the ovule. Ovule for the first time is developed in gymnosperms, integumented megasporangium. The megasporangium will have megaspores which are developed by the differentiation of cells of nucellus, and it will develop into multicellular female gametophyte that bears two or more archegonia or female sex organ. This archegonia will have the egg cell. Now, the multicellular female gametophyte is retained in the megasporangium, but the pollen grain is released. Now, unlike bryophytes and pteridophytes, the male and female gametophytes in this group and the next group, that is gymnosperms followed by angiosperms, they do not have independent free living existence. They don't have free living existence. The pollen grain is released from the microsporangium. They are carried by air currents, come in contact with the opening of the ovules, born on megasporophylls. So they will fuse and the zygote develops into embryo. Now the ovule will, after fertilization, will convert into seed because their fruits are absent, the seeds are naked. So these are the diagrams that you could observe here. The first one is Cycas, the second one is Pinus, the third one is Ginkgo. Here you could notice long shoot and dwarf shoot along with seeds that are shown. Now coming to the last group, which is angiosperms. Now unlike gymnosperms where the ovules are naked, in angiosperms or flowering plants, which is very important, you observe the pollen grains and ovules develop in specialized structures called flowers. So, in angiosperms, the contrasting character with compared to gymnosperms is in angiosperms that seeds are enclosed in fruits. The angiosperms are exceptionally large group of plants occurring in a wide range of habitats where you can see the difference in size compared to the smallest angiosperm, which is Wolffia, to the tall trees of eucalyptus. And these angiosperms are divided into two groups: dicotyledonous plants which have reticulate venation, taproot system, tetra or pentamerous nature of flowers, and you could also see monocotyledonous plants which have parallel venation, and also you could notice they have trimerous flowers with regard to the nature. So these are supposed to be the variations with regard to dicotyledonous and monocotyledonous plants in regard to the angiosperms. So these are the diagrams which show you a difference in the dicotyledonous plant and a monocotyledonous plant. So this is regarding the various important lines of NCERT textbook.